Would guidance from an expert help you to grow your business or career? Or do you seek inspiration for you or your kids? If so, welcome. Behind the Words TV gives you that one-on-one time with famous and emerging authors or content creators. They'll take you where you want to go. Behind the Words TV, right now. Has death visited your household? Are you or your family or somebody you know currently involved in a grief situation due to a loss of a loved one? Well, if so, you'll really want to pay attention to today's episode here on Behind the Words TV, because we're visiting with a grief author specialist. Hi, I'm Paul Madsen, host of the program and founder of growmedia.com. And with me today is Sharon Zehnder. Sharon, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Paul.
Sharon, I'm going to jump right in. I would like you to tell us, who is your book for? First of all, let's talk about what the book is. CrossWords for Grief, God's Truths for Encouragement and Hope. Tell us, Sharon, who is this book for? Who's going to benefit from reading it?
Paul, anybody that's grieving. And, nowadays grief, it was primarily for grief through death, but there's all kinds of other griefs that we're going through with the pandemic, losses in life, so all of those would apply.
You're telling me that there's more grief than just grief that a family has when they lose a loved one.
Yes.
There are other kinds of grief through,
Yes.
What's another example of something that would cause someone grief?
The loss of a job, a divorce, a handicapped child, the pandemic.
All sorts.
It's huge.
The pandemic is causing a lot of grief.
Yes.
I'll agree with you on that.
Yes.
I'll agree with you on all of those things. Grief is pervasive, and I guess why? Why did you write a book about grief? I mean, that's a kind of an obtuse topic. We don't really have think about it every day. But why did you write the book, Sharon?
Well, the book came about because I was completing my master's degree. I had a final project, and I didn't know what to do. And I was so thankful. The Lord just laid it on my heart as I was waking up one day. He gave me the concept, the idea, the name, and so I wrote it then, and I knew at the time He gave it to me as something to be published. That took a little years later, but we got there.
You got there,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, the Lord gave it to you in your heart, and you ran with it. That's
Yes.
wonderful. What's your background, Sharon? What qualifies you to write this book?
Well, my background, as far as education, I have a bachelor's of science and family services. I went on to get my master's of arts and liberal studies. There's a concentration in church and community. But the grief part in particular, I have worked at Heafy Mortuary, Heafy, Hoffman, Dwork, and Cutler Mortuary here in Omaha for 22 years.
Very good.
And it's family-owned
In what
mortuary.
role have you been on that?
I'm the aftercare director. It's a part-time position, but I follow up with families, especially those who have lost a spouse, and run our support groups, and also just make sure families know there's resources of support for them. And
I'm very
that's my
aware of
background.
that service and that group, and it's a wonderful one. In fact, CrossWords for Grief, Sharon Zehnder. You can get the book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever fine books are sold. Sharon, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Chapter 1 of Behind the Words TV. My guest today is Sharon Zehnder. She is the author of CrossWords for Grief, and we're thrilled to have her on the show. Sharon, good to see you again.
Thanks. So good to be here, Paul.
Well, yes, thanks for coming by. Sharon is a specialist in grief and grief counseling. Sharon, where is it you work?
I work at Heafy, Hoffman, Dwork, and Cutler Mortuary here in Omaha, a family-owned mortuary that has served families for over 135 years.
Wow, what is your role at the mortuary?
I am their aftercare director. I follow up with families, primarily spouses. After there has been a death, I'm available for other families as well, that have used our services, and just make sure that they know there's grief resources in our city, and oversee the grief resources that we offer.
You bet. Well, it sounds like, did you say 22 years?
Yes.
That's a long run, and I'm sure you've seen lots of stories of tragedy and loss, and kind of a depressing job sometimes, but I know you bring a joy to it, right?
I love what I do, Paul. I've heard over the years people that do hospice, how can you do that? I don't do hospice.
No.
But I follow up with families after, for many of them, it's the hardest thing they're ever having to do. And I have all kinds of hope and access to things that can help them, and I love what I do.
Well, you're a right fit for the job. You have a counselor's heart and a servant's heart, and I think it's perfect for what you do and what you do for them. The outgrowth of that is you created a book along the way.
Yes, I did.
Who is the book for?
The book is for anyone who's grieving. It's primarily written connected with death, but as we know, there's other griefs in our society. It will apply to a lot of different situations of grief, especially nowadays, the pandemic. There's a lot of fear and other things that can help with those situations.
Lots of grief to go around out there.
Yes, there is.
But grief also applies to the idea of other kinds of loss, not just the loss of a loved one.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, just navigating through the challenges of life. Grief is the unexpected. You think life is going to go a certain way, and you have a dream or thinking it's going to go a certain way, and it doesn't go the way you expect. So it brings challenges because it's, like I said, the death especially can be the hardest thing somebody's ever walked through. And so one of my roles is just to of course, listen, but it's also to give people resources. And, when I talk with people one-on-one, because a lot of times I can schedule appointments, there's just some relevant truths I like to hit with them.
Sure, you mentioned, and we'll get to that. When you're talking, I was reminded of the quote, and I do a little writing myself.
Yes.
A quote that says, life is what happens to you when you're making other plans.
Good quote.
I've known people who are grieving due to loss, and isn't that kind of how it seems? We're just getting ready to do something as a couple or as a family, and all of a sudden, boom, what happens? Is their whole life upended then, or what do you see?
Well, for sure, and the book comes out of my faith background because, when life goes a direction we're not expecting it to go, if you don't have that faith foundation, I don't know how people do it.
Yeah.
But in my own life, when I've walked through griefs and challenges, the basis for getting through those has always been God's word. It's always going to God, and He tells us so much in His word that equips us for these challenges that we go through so that we're not alone.
Right.
And there's help.
Well, and that I don't know how people get through it without that either. I agree with you 100%. Speaking of getting through it, what are some of the tools, some of the resources, some of the concepts, I guess, that you bring when you're visiting with people one-on-one or even in small groups after they've lost someone?
Yeah. One of the things that I have found helpful, if I were sitting down with you one-on-one, listening to your story and hearing a little bit more about it. But another thing, Paul, is sometimes it's just the basic idea that it's the first grief principle is it's okay to feel.
Okay to feel. Yeah, well.
Because sometimes we judge our feelings and we think, oh, this isn't right. And, but that first step is it's okay to feel.
That's beautiful because I know men in particular sometimes are taught to have that stiff upper lip. Don't be seen quivering. You coward. Man up.
Yep.
And you see that. So you're telling people it's okay to feel.
Yep. And I've put 3 words together that I kind of coined. It's the 3 words are you got to be real to feel to heal.
Okay.
And I talk about that in comparison to healthy grief versus unhealthy grief because there's many ways to grieve, and what you do in grief may be very different from another person sitting next to you, and so many of them can be healthy, but there's also aspects of it that can be unhealthy. And when I talk about the being real to feel to heal, it's navigating through the feelings,
Okay.
that you'll find the healing on the other side.
So the real part is acknowledgement,
Yes.
somewhat, and then the feel.
Yep, it's okay to feel.
It's okay to feel.
That's the real part.
Okay.
And then it's navigating through those feelings. Now here's the challenge. When you love someone, it hurts.
Yeah.
Who wants to go through hurting?
Yeah.
Nobody does.
No. Yeah.
So where it can go unhealthy is when you're navigating through those feelings, and instead of going through them to process them, you try to go around them. And I'm not talking about doing this every once in a while. I'm talking about a pattern that comes into play where you can numb your feelings. You can numb them with drugs, with alcohol,
Sure.
with gambling, with shopping, with eating. I mean, there's all kinds of ways. And,
Right.
and a grieving person isn't trying to become an addict.
No. No.
You know, but it's the use, abuse, addiction, and it's a slippery slope, and that gets into unhealthy grief. So it's just helping people realize, you know, be careful, because it hurts, but you can't escape the hurt, you can't go around it, you have to go through it.
And how does this wind up in the heal part?
Well, the heal part is, you know, with every person, is finding the times that you let yourself feel it, then getting a break from it. Because I'm not saying
Yeah.
feel your pain 24/7.
Right.
That would be sick.
Yeah, yeah.
Who would want to do that?
You don't want to be stuck in the grief that way.
Yeah.
That's too much stuckness, if that's
That's
a word.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So what else can people do to heal or get onto the healing phase?
Well, it's letting yourself feel what you need to feel. You know, a lot of times it's the tears,
Yeah.
it's the emotions, it's saying this hurts, and it's okay to say it hurts, and acknowledging that and letting yourself feel through it. Then get a break from it. You know,
Right.
do something else that, you know, so that, you know, maybe you let yourself do that for 20 minutes.
Sure.
So it kind of gets those feelings out and an expression for them.
Real, feel, heal. I think it's a good formula. It's not something that happens in a couple minutes on a TV show.
No.
It happens in a couple years, couple decades, who knows? It's a
Yeah.
long run. The book, Crossroads for Grief, by Sharon Zehnder. Sharon, I know briefly, it's not just some pie in the sky thing. You did your research for this book. Tell briefly us how you did the survey and things like that. I've read the book, and I enjoyed that part of it. Tell us briefly how you came up with the topics in here.
Well, because it was a project for my master's, it was researched. And I went to Grieving People Anonymously with a survey asking them, you know, what could you use help with? What positive and negative words are you running into that you're stumbling with or that you want on your grief journey? Came up with the top 30 words.
Okay.
And you'll find them in the book in a you know, descending order.
Right.
The top word was hope.
Right.
And so, you know, it's putting those words out there. What's kind of unique about the book is it's not a book, you can read it front to back,
Right.
but I think it's better served that I get up, I'm having a day that I feel alone, turn to the word alone. That was one of the researched words. Or I get up, I'm feeling fearful, don't know
Right.
where my finances are going to come from.
Yeah.
Turn to the word for fear. You know, and you'll find both biblical, because it's twofold. It's biblical. I wanted people to be able to connect with the word from the Lord and hear from him, but I also have practical stuff in there.
And you did a beautiful job of that. The book, Crossroads for Grief, and it's available in a lot of places where you typically find books. Sharon, it's a great book that is very practical and biblical. I loved it, and thank you for appearing today on this chapter of Behind the Words.
Thank you, Paul.
Hello and welcome back to Chapter 2 of Behind the Words TV with Sharon Zehnder. I'm Paul Madsen, host of the program and the founder of growmedia.com. Sharon, good to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul.
And thanks for coming back for the Chapter 2 here. We're going to talk some more about your book, CrossWords for Grief. And I read the book and loved it. It's a book for who, Sharon?
For anyone who's grieving.
Anyone who's grieving. A lot of grief out there these days.
There is. There is.
All sorts of kind, especially focused, I think, on people who've lost someone.
Yes.
And that is your background, is that correct?
Yes, I have a background in family services and got my master's and worked in this area of grief.
Long time. You even have a day job doing it. What's that?
I work as the aftercare director at Heafy, Hoffman, Dwork, and Cutler Mortuary here in Omaha.
Help people come and process their grief, basically.
Well, I meet with them to help them know resources to help them with their grief, and then we offer the support groups as well.
Yeah, those support groups, I've heard about those, are a good offering for the community. And people don't know what to do, who to be, what to act like after they lose a loved one. And so I encourage people who've been through that to work with Sharon on that group. They meet once a month.
My group that I work with as a facilitator is once a month. We have another counselor that works twice a month, and then we have a weekly, more social group.
Okay, great. All sorts of opportunities there.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have that information at the end of the telecast here, and so you can know how to contact Sharon about that. So why did you write this book, Sharon?
I just wanted people to, for me, knowing when I've walked through grief, the best help I've found is with the Lord. And so I wanted to put a devotional tool out there that would be both biblical but also practical. There's a lot of practical stuff in there to help people process through their feelings.
What I loved about it is you brought in personal stories of
Yes.
family vacations or mom's pressure cooker or whatever, all sorts of real life stuff. This is not just pie in the sky.
Yeah.
And then you bring in the whole thing of the biblical, and not just, here's a Bible verse, but you talk about what it means and the context of it. Mm-hmm. But yet it's not overly theological either. So
No,
I don't know how you did
that.
it, but it's a blend. Well, tell briefly how you broke up, how you came up with the chapter titles. I mean, we have hope, lonely, love, comfort, empty, strength, faith. These are words that people gave to you?
Yes, they were researched words. It was part of my master's project, so it is well researched, and it's asking people who they themselves are grieving, what do you need help with?
And they responded with these 30 different
30 words.
Words, and as someone who's gone through grief, you have all that churning stuff in your head all the time and that noise, and so if I wake up in the morning and I'm landed on a word, what do I do with your book?
You can turn to the word. If you're having a thought or an emotion, you can look at the different 30 words, and you can turn to whatever it is you're feeling or want to feel, and you're going to find some help from the Lord. I'm trying to just connect you. He's the one that is the source of help.
Laid it on, yeah.
And then there's practical stuff in there as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I don't have to read the whole book.
No, you don't.
I could just pick out a segment in there, the one segment.
Skip around and...
Skip around?
Yep.
Okay, well, I have your permission from the author, all right. Well, although I did read the whole book, so so that was good. You mentioned practical things as far as what people can do, and your book talks about them, of course, too. I need to work out my grief. What do I do? I mean, how do I get to that point, Sharon?
Yeah.
They say grief. Your grief is work, or working on your grief. Grief's work.
Grief is hard work.
It sounds like a big job, and I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I just wonder how to deal with that. What are some practical tools?
Yeah. One of the things I talk about is educate yourself. It's helpful to educate yourself with anything you go through. So that's where picking up books that talk about grief, it's very important. And then when I'm just trying to help people be practical with their grief, I landed on what I call 4 outs. They're
outs, okay.
They're under the word heal in the book.
Okay.
And the 4 outs are: you talk it out, you cry it out, you write it out, and you work it out. And then in the book, I talk about each one in a very practical way. What does that look like? Do you want me to just
let's start. Let's start with a couple of them.
Okay. When I talk about talk it out, the emphasis there is find what I call your safe people. Maybe you have 1 or 2 safe people that are like a gift of gold, and you talk about your loss with them. You talk about your loved one. You say their name, and this person isn't. They're good listeners. They care about you, and they're not trying to fix you.
Yeah, that's a key, isn't it? Because so often people try to fix them. I mean, I've heard of terrible stories where at a funeral where someone said to a new widow, like, at the funeral, don't worry, you're young, you'll find another husband. At the funeral, they're telling.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's not talking it out in a healthy way, is it?
No.
Anything else about talking it out?
That's kind of the main point, that when I hit that one, it's just letting the importance of talking about it and
Right.
processing it.
Well, I love your idea of the safe person,
Yeah.
someone you trust, someone who can handle it and really be your friend in that situation. What's the next out?
The next one is cry it out. And under that one, the principle there isn't how much you cry or how often.
Okay.
That's going to vary.
Yeah.
People vary on that. The importance is if you need to cry, you're okay to cry.
Yeah.
Because you can feel those emotions.
Yeah.
And God gave us tear ducts for a reason.
Yeah.
And there's some great things in the book, about this under the tears word and other segments where I just talk about, and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, it's okay to feel. And if you don't get that stuff out, getting it out is healthy. If it goes in, it's unhealthy.
Right,
That creates
right.
stress.
Yeah.
So getting it out is just making it healthy for you. And there's
Kind of like that pressure cooker release. Tell briefly about that.
Yeah, it's like I grew up on a farm, and my mom had a pressure cooker. I helped her with canning. And oh my goodness, I was so scared of that pressure cooker. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. And the audience knows what I'm talking about. If you've been around those old pressure cookers, not the current ones.
They've got the release valve, right?
Yeah, and they do. They have a release valve. And if you don't get that release valve turned or get that thing off the stove, you're going to have an explosion in your kitchen.
And so that's what you're talking about, cry it out.
Yeah.
Have a release.
Yep.
What's the next out?
The third one is to write it out. I've got 3 different methods I talk about. If you can journal on your own, but if somebody's like, I don't know how to journal, I give you 3 different methods that you can try, and each one of them provides different things, and I tell people it's a tool. Not everybody is designed to be a journaler, but almost every grief author that you read talks about the value of journaling.
Right.
And it's healthy with other things as well. So I talk about different methods where you can journal. And one method is a 2-sentence approach. Another method is journaling to God. It brings in the lamenting. You're going to find lamenting talked about quite a bit in the book under different segments. And then the last one is just having an ongoing journal where you write to your loved one.
Okay.
Almost everybody
wow.
talks to their loved one,
Wow.
but they don't go around talking about it.
Yeah.
And this isn't getting weird. It's just some of those things that people talk about in the privacy of their home or at the gravesite. Sometimes you can just write them down, and it just helps you to process.
That's beautiful. The 4 outs, and the other one, last one we don't have time
is
with, work it out, exercise, fitness, the book,
endorphins.
CrossWords for Grief by Sharon Zehnder, and it is a helpful tool for anybody in a grief situation, including loss of a loved one. Sharon, thanks for joining us on Chapter 2.
You're welcome, Paul. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Madsen of growmedia.com, and I'm here to talk to you about death, grief, and dying because Sharon Zehnder, author of CrossWords for Grief, is in the house today. Sharon, welcome.
Good to be here, Paul.
You bet. Let's jump right in about your book. I think it's great. I've read the book, and I noticed there's 30 different chapters. What's that about?
Well, there are 30 words, and when I researched the book, trying to find what would help grieving people, I wanted to go straight to them. And so I found the top 30 words that they wanted help with.
So they responded to you on a survey.
Yes.
So this is based on real people and their real grief journey and your reaction to it. Now you bring practical stories and spirituality to it. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, I knew that the reason I was writing it was because in my own story, where I've ministered to the most when I've been through hard times is God's Word. So I wanted to connect people with what God had to say about those words.
And you do a great job of researching that and showing that all up as well. Of the 30 words, Sharon, I mean, there's one in here. There's the hope, love, comfort, empty, strength, sorrow, all kind of typical things, but chapter 27, joy. What's that all about? I mean, grief is not a time of joy, is it?
Well, as you can imagine, and I know you've walked through this, anyone has, when they go through grief, you feel like you're never going to have joy again. And so my job is all about hope. And my job is all about helping people find that hope, through the Lord. And the chapter on joy, I use the scripture from Hebrews 12, verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. And I look at the Greek word there, and it allows for that the joy that was before him was you and me.
Wow.
When you can put yourself in that picture. And so I think one of the things is helping people find their joy is helping them to acknowledge it's okay to feel, it's okay to acknowledge the hurt, but look for the good thing that the Lord is doing in the midst of the pain.
Wow.
And so often that can just be, watching for those things that you can be thankful for. I talk about this with the two sentences.
We have to be grateful even in loss, I'm hearing. Sharon, your book ends with a powerful paragraph. Would you share that with us?
Sure. I end with this in the conclusion. Although at times we may feel like we will never navigate through the pain of loss, God reminds us, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you, in Hebrews 13, verse 5. He's given us everything we need in life through his promised Holy Spirit and his inspired word. No one can comfort the way God does.
Profound words that are wrapping up the book, CrossWords for Grief. Sharon Zehnder, check it out. It's worthwhile in this day and age of tremendous grief and of loss. Sharon, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Paul.